Gaining at all with this plan. We're looking for the middle class, and we're looking for jobs. I think the wealthy will be pretty much where they are. Pretty much where they are. If we can do that, we'd like it. If they have to go higher, they'll go higher.
All right, they could go higher. This contradicts what the administration has said so far. For example, repealing both the estate and the alternative minimum tax benefits wealthy Americans. Tax cuts across the board, tax rate cut across the board would benefit wealthy Americans. Now, the White House has not put out a detailed tax plan yet. Speaker Paul Ryan promises a framework in 2 weeks. But will the proposal be full reform or just tax cuts? A big difference. Senator Ted Cruz told CNN's Dana Bash he's open to either.
We could end up with something kind of like the Bush tax cuts light. Some modest reduction in rates, a little bit of simplification, and that's it.
Would you be okay with that?
I'd vote for that. That would be an improvement from the status quo. That'd be good.
There's also no word if the tax plan will be revenue neutral. Speaker Ryan wouldn't directly answer yesterday if that's the case. The Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, though, told Fox News all tax cuts will be paid for with faster economic growth. Dynamic scoring, which is something that budget wonks say is magical math. The president yesterday very clear that he wants a tax rate for companies at 15%. That's where the specificity is. 15% corporate tax rate. A lot of experts tell me it might have to be a little bit higher than that. But the focus of the discussion seems now to really be on making sure companies are going to get that tax break.
Will the White House take the leadership on the tax proposal, or will the House, as we thought previously?
The House has been working on this for a very long time. Paul Ryan has been working on this since he was in diapers, basically.
That will reveal a lot,
yeah.
on it. Who takes the reins on this thing? Well, the families of 8 Florida nursing home residents left devastated after a broken air conditioner cost loved ones their lives. We have reports from Florida and from St. Martin on the Irma aftermath. Next.
My advice for looking younger, longer.
Trump praising his administration for its handling of 2 catastrophic back-to-back hurricanes.
Especially in light of the fact that we had 2 massive hurricanes, the likes of which I guess our country has never seen. I don't think they've ever seen. One was the biggest ever in water, and the other was the biggest ever in wind. And you put them together, and we have devastation in Texas and in Florida. And we've done, and other parts of our country, by the way. And I think we've gotten very high marks for the way we've handled them thus far, and we continue to handle them well. But they were very big and very powerful.
The president and his administration, though, not getting high marks for their handling of the cause of these storms. Many scientists say the reason they were so massive and so devastating may well be climate change, rising temperatures, of course, increasing the intensity and impact of major storms since they feed off water. But the Trump administration refuses to blame climate change. In fact, the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt responded to a question from CNN about this by saying, and I quote Mr. Pruitt, to have any kind of focus on the cause and effect of the storm versus helping people or actually facing the effect of the storm is misplaced. To use time and effort to address it at this point is very, very insensitive to the people in Florida. Up front now, the Republican mayor of Miami, Tomas Regalado. And Mayor Regalado, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. So you heard Scott Pruitt. It's insensitive to the people in Florida to be talking about climate change right now. Is it insensitive?
It is insensitive of his part, because I wish that he would have been here when people ran from high rises because of the storm surge. I wish that he had been here when we were told that we were facing apocalyptic moments with a Cat 5 hurricane, and yet we got Cat 1, but the destruction here in Miami has been incredible for that kind of storm. You know, it's funny that the President of the United States just said that we have just 2 storms that we have never seen. Erin, I was a journalist before being mayor of the city and commissioner, and we follow the storm by comparing to past storms and the history of those phenomena. And yet, now we are told that these 2 storms back to back are anomaly. We had here in Miami something in August which wasn't reported by the national press, but we were told that we were going to get some rain during August day, And yet, in 1 hour in downtown Miami, we had 5 inches of rain. The National Weather Service says it was an anomaly. We had flooding, cars were destroyed, business were affected. So I'm not a militant, I'm not a national leader, I'm not one of those people that is obsessed about climate change, but I can tell you for a fact that in my city, we have a problem. And in my office, I see the bay, I see the docks. I've been there 8 years. Through the windows, I see the water. I am telling you that the water is higher and higher every year that I see. So he can say whatever he wants. We're doing here helping the people of Miami. We have 41% of the population of Miami without power at this moment. We had to impose curfews in Miami because of looting. We have 18 people arrested for looting, and we have damage all over the city.
And I know you are dealing with that crisis, but you've made it very clear, dealing with the crisis, the immediacy does not mean that we shouldn't be talking about why we are here to try to stop it from happening again. Look, it's not just the EPA administrator, right, that is not admitting this is climate change. We're seeing it from the Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert. The president himself, as you know, Mayor Regalado, has called global warming a hoax, right? He's pulled the United States out of the Paris climate deal, right? He's made his point of view very clear over time. Are you concerned about his policies right now, that he is going to make things even worse by what he's doing for Miami?
Well, I think, he's a very successful business person. And I will tell the president, Mr. President, had we had been hit on a direct way by a Cat 5 in the city of Miami, you, sir, will be now worrying about the collapse of the insurance world as we know it in the United States, because we have the most exposed assets here. In the 14 miles of waterfront that we have billions and billions of dollars. 100,000 people only in Miami live in the waterfront, and we have Key Biscayne and Miami Beach. I will tell you that this is something that is not only about Miami. It's about the United States.
So
and
what do
we
you
have
say
to have
to the
this
president tonight, Mayor Regalado? What do you want him to say? To say he's wrong about climate change?
No, I don't want him to say that he's wrong about climate change. I just want him to tell his people to give us an explanation, to just not say this is an anomaly and it never happened before. Things happen, Forrest Gump, remember, and we need an explanation, because if we have to plan for the future, we need to understand that Harvey and Irma were not anomalies, that were things that are happening now because of several things that is happening. I'm asking the president just to give us a chance to be informed, to inform the residents of South Florida and the United States.
Mayor Regalado, I appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And next, a couple missing for 4 days in the Florida Keys. We have an update, a happy one, about what happened to them.
A non-invasive test you can use at home.
And President Trump agree, both pointing the finger at the former FBI Director Jim Comey. Clinton sat down late today with Anderson, and here is some of what she said.
What's important to me going forward is, as I say, I think it's important to focus on what happened because lessons can be learned. But the more important lessons that will affect our democracy going forward are not about him and his investigation. He, I think, forever changed history, but that's in the past. What's important is the fact that the Russians are still going at us. He himself admitted that before Congress. People I really respect, like Jim Clapper and John Brennan and others who knew what the Russians were doing, have been sounding the alarm. I will tell you this, Anderson, if I had been elected president under the same circumstances, so that, I lost the popular vote, I squeaked through the Electoral College, and evidence came up that the Russians, for whatever reason, were trying to help me, I would have said on the first day in office, we're going to launch the most thorough investigation. No nation, particularly an adversary nation, can mess with our democracy. I would have had an independent commission. I would have done everything I could to get to the bottom of it, because it's not going to stop. That's what I'm worried about.
Up front tonight, David Gergen, who served as advisor to 4 presidents, April Ryan, the White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks, and Mark Preston, our senior political analyst. Mark, you heard her. Comey, quote, forever changed history. loud and clear. She's sure she would have won if he hadn't interfered. Not mincing words.
You know, not mincing words, she showed that she's human, no doubt about that. She showed that she is willing to be brutally honest with her feelings, but sometimes you don't speak in your outside voice. And I do think her criticisms across the board probably would have been better kept for her in her own space in history if she kept some of those criticisms inside. Now, Comey certainly had something to do with it, but I don't think we can lay the blame squarely at his doorstep and say, had he not done what he had done a week before the election, that she would be president.
And yet, David, that's exactly what she's doing, okay? Comey has been the focus of her new book tour. Here she is in 2 more interviews just today.
The role that he played historically was determinative.
I would have won but for Jim Comey's letter. That stopped my momentum, and it really did cause enough people to move away from me.
What does she get from this, David, from being so direct and blatant?
Maybe she finds some inner peace. I'm not sure, Aaron. I don't think it's helping book sales, and it's not helping her reputation. But I think it is very consistent with what she has believed since the election, and certainly Bill Clinton has believed since the election. They really do believe that the Comey incident, tied to then the fake news things that they can't think came from the Russians, brought her popularity down sharply just before the election, and they were never able to fully recover. So she has a point, but I think the way she is harping on it instead of going more to the future, I do think is not helping her reputationally.
And April, I want to get to that in a moment, but speaking of harping, of course, and Jim Comey, the other person who harps is obviously the president. And today, the White House coming out and hitting Comey. You were there at the briefing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders when she spoke today and yesterday, saying some of Comey's conduct likely could have been illegal. All right, that's what she said yesterday. Then today she was asked to explain. You were there. Here's what she said.
Leaking FBI memos on a sensitive case, regardless of classification, violates federal laws, including the Privacy Act, standard FBI employment agreement, and non-disclosure agreement all personnel must sign. I think that's pretty clean and clear that would be a violation.
I mean, April, she was clearly prepared for this, although if you're Jim Comey, I don't know how you see it. Yes. You're either an abject failure and you really blew it, or both sides hate you, and so you're doing something right.
Yeah, you know, Sarah did double down today, and it was almost as if she was leading into some kind of action, punishment taking against him. I'm waiting to hear that next. I mean, I'm sure it's coming. But you have to remember this. James Comey has been pivotal for the last, in this whole news cycle for the last, I'll say, year or so. You know, in November, just before, well, in late October, you know, we were waiting to hear, you know, first in the summer, the end of the summer, we heard Loretta Lynch and James Comey both say, you know, we're not going to take action on issues of her emails. And then the next thing you know, a couple of weeks into, just before we go into the election, anyone who was on the fence, that, you know, pretty much sealed the fate for Hillary Clinton. You know, James Comey is also, you know, we forget that piece. She's really brought it back to the psyche of a lot of people, because right now with the fact that he was fired, people were looking at him as a hero, but it brings Comey back into the reality of who he is. And the question is now with the White House, are they looking at him as a leaker, or for some, they're looking at him as a whistleblower? So what happens next to Comey from Hillary and from the White House?
And Clinton's book, just so everyone knows, it's the top bestseller right now on Amazon. She is on a book tour. And as you point out, Mark, she's a lot of blame to go around. It's Comey, Russia, the media. She blamed misogyny and sexism directly in her interview with Jane Pauley. And she is angry that women didn't vote for her. Okay? She's angry about it. Here's what she told Anderson.
Do you give absolution to those who didn't vote, to women who didn't vote?
No, I don't. Look, when it first started happening, it was so soon after the election, and the election was so bizarre and close. It was hard for me to, you know, comfort somebody who was coming to me and saying, oh, I wish I'd done more, or I'm sorry I didn't vote, because I think this was one of the most consequential elections that, you know, we have faced in a long time. So no absolution.
Mark, not afraid to blame women themselves, and as she said in other exchanges, sexism, misogyny, not afraid.
Again, brutally honest, certainly showing her failings, but again, not the smartest thing to do, because in many ways, she would have been smarter to say, I tried not to, or I tried to forgive them. It was very difficult, but I forgive them now. She would come off looking better than looking like she's trying to settle scores with those who didn't support her.
April?
I don't know if it's about settling scores or settling your spirit. Hillary Clinton is totally different from what she was on the campaign trail. We are not hearing those soaring speeches of we can do this together. She is putting the reality on the table. And for a lot of people, it's hard to bite because we heard this woman who was on the campaign trail making us feel like we could overcome, we could do this, we could do that. But now it's, I'm not absolving anyone, particularly people of her own gender. It's very interesting to hear this different Hillary Clinton with this new book.
All right. Thank you all very much. I wonder what this will do to some diehard Democratic women who just couldn't stomach voting for her, whether this makes them regret it or not. Well, we'll see. Thanks very much to all. And you can see more of Anderson's interview with Hillary Clinton. That is next on 360. Next out front, Ted Cruz and Twitter. Who was behind his Twitter account, late at night when a pretty disgusting porn video was liked? Did someone else log on as him? The senator in his first television interview since the story broke.
The media and the left seem obsessed with sex.
And Miami's mayor saying Irma was due to climate change, and he wants Donald Trump to admit it. The mayor of Miami is out front.
The Russia investigation, the investigation into Russian meddling in the U.S. presidential election, Jim Shooter, Michael Flynn, all of a sudden, his name has resurfaced on a couple of areas, the president's former national security advisor.
That's right. After it was quiet for some time, but first being that the Senate Intelligence Committee, which first subpoenaed him a number of weeks ago, reached out to him again to see if he'd be willing to testify before the committee. He refused in the original request, citing his Fifth Amendment rights. And they went back, in effect, to say, have you changed your consideration here? And he said no. So turning down that, we should note that he has produced documents, some 600 pages in documents, business records, which were in answer to a subpoena that followed that original request to come and give testimony. He has provided those documents. But suffice to say that both the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee would like to hear from him more and have more documents from him. But at this point, that's as far as he's going to go.
Manu, he's a retired three-star general, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, but when he applied as a civilian to renew his security clearances, he didn't mention that he had been involved in trying to put together a deal with Russia and Saudi Arabia, $1 billion deal to build nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia. That sounds like a big deal.
It is a big deal because the law specifies very clearly that you need to disclose these foreign trips on your security clearance form. And this is not just the first example. There are multiple examples now of Michael Flynn not disclosing these foreign trips. This most recent one revealed by House Democrats who had gotten information from Michael Flynn's business partners who were working on this Mideast deal to deal with this nuclear energy project, as well as purchasing Russian military hardware. Now, as soon as he came back in 2015 from the Mideast, he renewed his security clearance form, but he did not disclose that meeting. This is something now that they have sent over to Bob Mueller's team, the special counsel, to investigate. And you have to think this is an area ripe for his investigation, which is looking into a number of issues that Michael Flynn could.
That's not something, a deal like that, that's something that you can forget about.
No, which certainly, not only does it obviously raise or ring alarm bells, it makes you think that he was intentionally trying to hide it. And then the question is why? It's not like look, there are people in the Trump world who have never filled out forms like that before. And I'm not saying that they have an excuse, but they've never filled out forms like that before. Michael Flynn is not one of them. He has been in the United States government for a long time. He understands what's right and what's wrong. Now, he was in the military, but still, he understands what's right and what's wrong when it comes to telling people exactly what he did and knowing maybe if he didn't do it, why he's keeping it under.
Gloria, where's this heading?
Well, look, there are lots of questions, as Jana was just out, about these security clearance forms. There have been questions about Jared Kushner, why it took him, I think, 3 tries, right, guys? 3 tries to do a full security clearance form. He says, and his attorneys say, it was inadvertent at first, and then they discovered more meetings going through their emails for discovery for the committees. I think that because Flynn has some legal exposure at a lot of areas, I think this will not be taken lightly because, as Dana points out, he's somebody who's been in the government. And the administration has always said, well, we assumed the security clearance, it was renewed. Go look at the Obama administration. They gave him his security clearance. I don't think that's going to hold up when you're talking to Bob Mueller.
And he's got a lot on his plate right now, Bob Mueller. We're watching it closely. Stand by, guys. There's more breaking news we're following in Florida. 8 deaths now at a nursing home that lost power in the wake of Hurricane Irma. News information on the Russia investigation. New details about what President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, told congressional investigators. Let's bring in our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, what are you learning?
Wolf, last week when Susan Rice met with the House Intelligence Committee, I'm told she talked at length about unmasking the identities of Trump officials whose names were shielded in classified intelligence reports. Now, Rice was trying to figure out why the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates was in New York last December, because the Obama administration was not notified in advance of the Crown Prince's visit, which is typically custom. Now, it turns out the Crown Prince was in New York to meet with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, Steve Bannon, his chief strategist, and Michael Flynn, then the president's incoming national security advisor. Now, the Washington Post reported on the meeting earlier this year, but this is the first we're hearing of Rice detailing it as a reason to unmask.
We've also heard about another secret meeting involving the Emirates.
Yeah, that's right. This New York meeting preceded a separate effort by the UAE to facilitate a back-channel communication between Russia and the incoming Trump White House. And that back-channel discussion, we know, took place in the Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean shortly before the inauguration. Now, sources who know about the New York meeting insist that the Russia issue was not discussed at all at Trump Tower. But Wolf, that timing of that New York meeting followed by the Seychelles meeting, and the fact that the UAE did not notify the Obama administration about why it was coming to the United States, has all raised questions in the eyes of investigators.
On another sensitive issue, we know that President Trump, over the summer, he called out the President Obama's former national security advisor, Susan Rice, for unmasking. What do they say now?
Well, I actually put this question directly to Sarah Sanders, the White House spokeswoman, and she would not explicitly say if the president still believes that Rice committed a crime, instead saying that the issue of leaking and classified intelligence and unmasking needs to be investigated. But a number of Republicans, Wolf, who sat in on the Rice testimony said they don't believe she did anything illegal, and they believe that she acted properly. And Wolf, Rice herself declined to comment for the story, and the UAE did as well.
You also have some exclusive reporting on the FBI's refusing to allow 2 FBI officials to testify up on Capitol Hill. What are you learning?
Yeah, that's right. The Senate Judiciary Committee actually wants to meet with these 2 officials to learn more about the circumstances around the firing of James Comey. But they have been told the reason why these 2 officials will not come before the Senate Judiciary Committee is because of the special counsel's investigation, suggesting, Wolf, that the special counsel is looking into the issue of James Comey's firing and showing that perhaps the issue of obstruction of justice is on the table in its own investigation. And the Republican and Democrat on the Judiciary Committee is saying, look, we don't want to talk about the investigation. We just want to focus on the Comey firing. But still, the Department of Justice is not playing ball.
Very strong reporting, Manu Raju. Thank you very, very much. Joining us now is the top Democrat of the House Intelligence Committee, Representative Adam Schiff. Congressman, thanks for joining us. We got lots of issues to discuss. I know you got to vote fairly soon, but Republicans appear to be, correct me if I'm wrong, satisfied with Susan Rice's explanations regarding the unmasking of Trump campaign officials. Does this put to bed any suggestion she did anything either improper or illegal?
Well, Wolf, I can't go into the contents of her testimony. I can say that, very broadly, we were interested in the Obama administration's response once we learned that the Russians were hacking our democratic institutions. But Ambassador Rice was also asked about the unmasking issue. And I think that people were very satisfied with her testimony. And I can certainly express my own view that I've seen no indication that she did anything at all wrong. In fact, I think that what she did in her role was perfectly appropriate. So I think that people were impressed with her testimony.
During an interview with the New York Times earlier this year, President Trump suggested that Susan Rice actually committed a crime by unmasking people. So how does that accusation look now in retrospect?
Well, it looks now like it did at the time, which is a baseless accusation and a slander against a dedicated public servant. Not at all unlike the president's suggestion that he had been illegally wiretapped at Trump Tower, something that even the Justice Department recently debunked. But that had already been, I think, labeled as patently false by Director Comey and Director Rogers in their testimony.
What questions, Congressman, do you have about that meeting in December that Manu Raju just reported on between the UAE Crown Prince and Trump officials? Apparently, the Trump White House was not, the Obama White House was not informed about that, that the Crown Prince of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, was even visiting the United States.
Well, that's a subject that I can't confirm or deny, so I'm not in a position to really discuss that.
All right, I know you got to vote. We'll continue this conversation later. Adam Schiff of California, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, thank you very much. So let's get to our panel. And Gloria Borger, let's start with you. These are all pretty dramatic developments which suggest the Russia probe, the Russia investigation is moving on to a new level.
Well, you know, it is, Wolf, and you'll remember at the beginning of the Russia probe, and I think that's one of the reasons Manu decided to pursue this, is that there were all these questions that were raised about this issue of unmasking. And when, in fact, as Devin Nunes, who was the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, had intimated that the Obama administration was unmasking names of people in these meetings inappropriately. And I think what we're reading from and learning in Manu's piece is that, in fact, Susan Rice made the case that she had a good reason to try and figure out who was in this meeting, because she had not been told about it in advance. And of course, this was during the transition when she was still National Security Advisor. So I think that is one big partisan area that, in effect, is starting to get cleared up, because we've heard intelligence official after intelligence official say that this issue of unmasking is, in fact, something that is done all the time, that it is not done for fun or gossip, but in fact, it's done because people need to understand the context of these meetings and to help them understand what may or may not have taken place.
Dana Bash, so what does all this suggest about Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee? He's removed himself from the actual Russia probe, about his involvement in this, because he's one of those who was suggesting that Susan Rice did something improper by unmasking these Trump campaign officials.
He wasn't just one of those. He was taking the lead on it with that bizarre press conference that he had, that his, racing to the White House, coming out again and talking about it. It suggests that maybe he didn't have all the information when he was accusing Susan Rice of unmasking. When I say all the information about why she unmasked. And now, because of Manu's reporting, we have more information. And as you were reporting, Manu, Republicans understand more why Susan Rice felt that she had to do what she did, and say that they, that they can't blame her for it, that they probably would have done the same if they were in her position.
So does this does it put to rest these accusations against Susan Rice, Jim Sciutto?
Well, I mean, not from one party, probably, but it's interesting. Very soon after Nunes made these accusations, we spoke with both Democratic and Republican lawmakers and asked if, based on the classified information they'd seen about these unmasking requests, whether there was anything unusual about them, untoward, illegal. And they told us, like Manu and I did that story, this is weeks ago, they said no, Democrats and Republicans. So for some time, that has been the view. This makes it more definitive, because now we know exactly, she's given her explanation as to what she was looking for. So it backs that up to some degree. But will it put it to rest for some Republicans? I don't know. I will say, though, that it's interesting, talking to members of the committee, Nunes, and I wonder if you agree, Manu, that Nunes is somewhat on an island here about these accusations. You don't have Republicans lining up behind him and saying, yeah, we got to burn the house down over
no
this.
question about it. Tom Rooney was one of the members who just took advantage, is now helping run this investigation after Nunes stepped aside, said that Rice didn't do anything wrong. He said, in fact, he doesn't think that she did anything illegal. Same with Trey Gowdy, said something similar. Mike Conaway, who's running this investigation, told me yesterday there's no reason to bring her back for further questions, but I tried to ask Devin Nunes these questions yesterday. He declined to entertain any questions. He was upset about a previous story that CNN reported. He did not specify which story it was, but because of that, he didn't want to answer any questions whatsoever. Suggests that perhaps he's not satisfied, but he may be the only one who's not.
Yeah, and just to be precise, Susan Rice, the then National Security Advisor to President Obama, and other Obama officials did not know the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates was in New York, was meeting with officials with Trump campaign officials, and they said, well, who's he meeting with? And that's the unmasking. And the conclusion, apparently, is there was nothing wrong with her trying to figure out who the visiting Crown Prince of the UAE was
In
meeting
light of the
with.
fact that it would have been protocol for him to let the current administration, which was still serving, of course, the Obama administration, to let them know. UAE, U.S. ally.
You know, it's unsettling if you're the national security advisor and you see an important foreign figure coming into the United States and you don't know about it and you don't know why and you don't know who this person is meeting with. And, you know, so I think that she probably explained, like, I had to try and figure out what he was doing. And by the way, there doesn't have to be anything nefarious there. I might add, Jared Kushner and the rest of the people in that meeting have said that they were talking about foreign policy, perhaps trying to establish a back channel to Russia. And so it doesn't mean that there was anything nefarious. What it means, though, is that the National Security Advisor of the United States didn't know about it.
To find out who they were meeting with. All right, stand by, guys. There are new developments involving the President's former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. We'll share that with you right after a quick break.
It is the White House today wading into a controversy about ESPN host Jemele Hill. The sports network itself is distancing itself from Hill after she sent a series of critical tweets about President Trump, beginning with, quote, Donald Trump is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. Now, ESPN called that inappropriate. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, well, her language was a little bit stronger than that.
I think that's one of the more outrageous comments that anyone could make, and certainly something that I think is a fireable offense by ESPN.
A fireable offense by ESPN. I want my political panel to weigh in. Simone, obviously the comments were outrageous, but is it appropriate for a White House to say that an employee of a private company should be fired for saying something offensive or critical of the President of the United States?
It's absolutely inappropriate, and I need this White House to get tougher skin. Look, it is a fact of the matter that Donald Trump, after Charlottesville, after white supremacists killed someone in Charlottesville, Virginia, he came out and said there was violence on many sides. He refused to forcefully denounce white supremacy until he was poked and prodded. And then in an unhinged press conference, he seemed to defend white supremacists. So it's not out of bounds for anyone to maybe associate the president with white supremacy.
So I know that you disagree with that, but let's just focus, if you would, on what Sarah Sanders said today, because conservatives generally don't think that the government should be making calls about the free speech of people in private life.
Sarah's often asked to talk about the topic of the day. That happens to be a topic of the day. That said, ESPN has to decide, do they want to be a sports network or do they want to be a news outlet? And do they want to start talking about politics? Because there's lots of great outlets to go talk about news, and that's where people tune in. People tune in to ESPN to watch sports. And it's why you have seen over the last couple of years, ESPN continue to ratchet or see their ratings go down as they have engaged more and more in politics.
So there's another issue that Sarah Sanders made today having to do with this allegation that she said, and she's been saying it over several days, that former FBI Director James Comey has possibly committed criminal acts violating federal laws when he leaked memos he wrote during his time as FBI Director. Take a listen.
Leaking FBI memos on a sensitive case, regardless of classification, violates federal laws, including the Privacy Act, standard FBI employment agreement, and non-disclosure agreement all personnel must sign. I think that's pretty clean and clear that would be a violation.
So Comey and his surrogates have said that there was nothing he shared in his memos that was classified in any way. What do you think is the strategy here? Because obviously this isn't just a one-off. He's been saying this over the last several days.
Yeah, and the reason why she's talking about it now is because Steve Bannon brought this up in an interview and said that the firing of James Comey was one of the biggest mistakes in modern political history. So this is the White House responding to that and essentially saying, no, they think it was right to fire James Comey. It's interesting that their explanations have shifted, right? The original explanations about firing James Comey had to do with his hiring of Hillary Clinton. They also had to do with Russia, according to Donald Trump. So they're muddying the waters, I think, in terms of how they're talking about it now and what went into the firing of James Comey. I think ultimately it is an attempt to undermine James Comey, but it's also obviously an attempt to undermine Mueller's investigation. And at least a part of that investigation goes to the firing of James Comey and whether or not that constituted obstruction of justice. So I think that's what you're hearing from the White House at this point, trying to undermine that investigation and in many ways trying to kind of prejudge it. And if it comes back, that Mueller says something about the White House and that this was obstruction of justice, they can undermine it from the beginning. So I think that's what's there. She was clearly prepared for that question, right? She had, the readout there to be read. So I think they feel like they're on strong footing in this instance. And I think this is something we'll hear from the White House again and again.
Tough day to be James Comey, though, because you're getting it from Sarah Sanders, and then you're getting it from Hillary Clinton. Her book is full of pointing fingers at him, at James Comey. So, going after him seems to be kind of politically trendy.
Well, look, I was one of the folks that said James Comey handled, when he came out and gave this egregious, and some folks would argue unnecessary press conference on the Clinton email investigation, if you will. I was one of the folks that noted that I thought that was inappropriate. Look, I think this isn't the first time James Comey has been in the crosshairs in politics with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and it won't be the last. So I think he's got a little tough skin, and I'm not crying any tears for James Comey today.
He gets himself in these situations because the more he talks, the more questions he raises. He did an entire investigation and then just a couple weeks ago said, oh, I had decided back in May that investigation didn't have anything to go wrong. And that's why his credibility on the left and on the right is why he gets criticized, because you can't trust this guy.
Speaking of the left, Senate Democrats shifting rapidly to the left when it comes to health care, I think it's fair to say. Senator Bernie Sanders introducing today a Medicare for All bill, legislation, moving the U.S. towards a single-payer health care system. He had 16 other co-sponsors.
Yep.
You worked for Bernie Sanders at one point.
No relation.
No relation. and look at that. Obviously, quite a few of them are running for, potentially going to run for president in 2020.
We don't know who's running for president, Jake, but we could argue some folks are. Look, I think it's important to note Kamala Harris was the first senator to step out and support Senator Sanders' Medicare for All bill, and then lots of senators followed. I think now what we're seeing is that it is politically popular. It is okay. It is no longer taboo to support Medicare for All. I remember being out on the campaign trail, being at different debates and whatnot, and the Democrats were coming up to me saying, what you guys are doing is infeasible, it's dangerous, this is never going to happen. And today, we've got a bill co-sponsored by 16 other folks starting the conversation. And so this bill isn't something that's going to be signed into law tomorrow, but this is a conversation that needs to get started, build on the enormous success of the Affordable Care Act, and I am happy that it's happening.
And one of the things you see here is not only is there a shift among Democrats, and really a slight shift in terms of rank and file Democrats and how they feel about Medicare for All, it really is among independents. You look back 8 years ago, it's about in the mid-40s among independents supporting Medicare for All. Now it's in the mid-50s. 55% of independents support Medicare for All. It's like 64% of Democrats, and that's only shifted a little bit. So they're in some good territory, I think, among those independent voters. And of course, Bernie Sanders himself, an independent, not a Democrat.
Although there are Democrats, I should say, who do not support this. The majority of the Democratic caucus in the Senate does not support it, and a few of them would rather that Democrats weren't bringing this up, that they were kind of winning the health care argument because Republicans just were not able to pass anything.
If there was any question who the leader of the Democratic Party is on ideas, it's Bernie Sanders. And he will continue to shift the party to the left, which will cause them electoral problems down the road. And because even he cannot spell out how he would pay for a Medicare for All system. And you said it, Jake, there are Democrats in the Senate who are opposed to it. Is it going to pass? Probably not.
So I just want to note, I think it's I think we should be careful to let the Republicans tell us who's in charge of our party when they've clearly got a questionable person in charge of theirs. And secondly, this bill is going to start a conversation. This is not legislation that's meant to be signed into law tomorrow. This is a conversation we should be having as Americans, not just as Democrats or Republicans. And I'm happy the conversation started today.
A big part of the conversation, Nia Malika, and we don't have any time to continue it, but the big part of the conversation is, how do you pay for it?
Because what is it, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there? I mean, that's the big question.
I mean, over the next 10 years, our current healthcare program is going to cost us $40 trillion. And so we need changes in healthcare either way.
All right.
We're going to get something done.
Tax reform needs to pass this year.
Simone, David, and Nia Malika, thank you so much. Be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Jake Tapper. You can tweet the show at The Lead. CNN, that's it for The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. Turning over to Wolf Blitzer in The Situation Room. Be forgiven for thinking that the political conversation today sounds a little familiar, a little bit like the one you heard a year ago. Both Hillary Clinton and a spokesman for President Trump are criticizing former FBI Director James Comey for how he handled investigations about them. CNN anchor Anderson Cooper just sat down with Hillary Clinton for his special that's going to air this evening. He joins me now. Anderson, the former FBI director, a topic Clinton really wanted to discuss.
Absolutely. I mean, she, in her book, clearly believes that 11 days before the election, when Jim Comey announced that he was reopening the investigation, she believes that cost her the election. That moment was pivotal. She says there's, polling evidence to back it up, that she was making inroads in certain key states among white women voters. And then after that statement in the preceding days, the bottom just dropped out. It's obviously an arguable point. Some will take great issue with it. She did say she believed the Comey investigation changed history. She also obviously focused a lot on Russia and Russia's role in the election, stopping short of saying she believes that there was collusion, but she certainly is following all the ups and downs of the Russia investigation over the last 11 months or so since the election. I want to play something that she said about Director Comey and also Russia.
What's important to me going forward is, as I say, I think it's important to focus on what happened because lessons can be learned. But the more important lessons that will affect our democracy going forward are not about him and his investigation. He, I think, forever changed history, but that's in the past. What's important is the fact that the Russians are still going at us. He himself admitted that before Congress. People I really respect, like Jim Clapper and John Brennan and others, who knew what the Russians were doing, have been sounding the alarm. I will tell you this, Anderson, if I had been elected president under the same circumstances, so that, I lost the popular vote, I squeaked through the Electoral College, and evidence came up that the Russians, for whatever reason, were trying to help me, I would have said on the first day in office, we're going to launch the most thorough investigation. No nation, particularly an adversary nation, can mess with our democracy. I would have had an independent commission. I would have done everything I could to get to the bottom of it, because it's not going to stop. That's what I'm worried about.
And Jake, you've covered her a lot. It is interesting in this interview. She does seem much more candid, and certainly in her book to some extent, but she seems more relaxed almost, and kind of going into details on things that happened during the campaign that as a candidate she probably never would have said.
You two talked about the second debate, which you co-moderated with Martha Raddatz. Now the time has passed. Looking back on it, did she have any reflections on that?
She did. I mean, she's really, it was fascinating to talk to her about it because, for the moderators, 2 days before that debate, that the Access Hollywood tape came out, as moderators, we were wrestling with how to address that, how to question both candidates about that. So it was interesting to hear her perspective on what she wanted to say. If you remember, she started the debate. They didn't shake hands. There was also the sort of the physicality of the debate of candidate Trump walking around the stage. She talks a lot about that. Seeing him out of the corner of her eye, being aware that, in her opinion, he was clearly trying to intimidate her, and her now rethinking how she handled that, whether she should have actually addressed it on that stage or not.
All right, Anderson Cooper, thank you. You can see all of Anderson Cooper's full interview with Hillary Clinton this evening. It's going to air at 8 o'clock Eastern right here on CNN. Why is the White House calling for the firing of a TV anchor? That story next. Now, in that one brief moment when President Trump's Twitter account was not the Twitter account setting Washington abuzz, late Monday night, Senator Ted Cruz's account liked a tweet of an adult video. And today, the senator told CNN he knows who did it. CNN's Dana Bash just spoke with Senator Cruz. Joins me now. And Dana, the senator's office initially said that he'd been hacked and they were going to report it to Twitter. Then they later said it was a staffer with access to the senator's account.
That's right. And that is his answer now. But I have to say that the senator came to talk to me about the tax reform plan that he unveiled today. And he clearly wishes that that was his focus, but also understands, Jake, that the internet is abuzz with questions about that porn tweet. And he tried to answer.
Talk about the tweet. At Ted Cruz, your Twitter handle, liked a post that was clearly porn. What happened?
Oh, look, it was, we had a staffer who accidentally hit the wrong button. And it was a screw up. I will say Twitter went crazy with it. It became trending. As soon as we found out about it, we pulled it down. And it's generated a lot of amusement. It has prompted a lot of jokes. I understand that. I saw one person joking online that if only this had happened during the presidential, Cruz might be in the White House right now.
Have you identified the staffer? You know who it is?
We have looked into it. Yes, we have identified it. We pulled it down. It was an honest mistake. It was not. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't deliberate. It was a screw up.
Is the staffer being punished?
We have talked with the staffer. It's not going to happen again. It was a screw up.
Can you tell me the staffer's name?
I'm not going to out the fella. I mean, we have dealt with it internally, but I'm not going to throw someone under the bus.
Can you definitively say that it wasn't you?
It was not me, and it's not going to happen again. This was a screw up.
Do you appreciate the irony that you once defended a Texas law banning sales?
The ending of Irma is no longer a hurricane. She's not being tracked as that.